Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this, which is a joint meeting between the IMRS and the Nautical Institute. This meeting is off the back of the joint meeting that we had last month entitled Waterbird in October, which was fantastic. I think that everyone enjoyed that. This one's called Out with the Old and In with the New, large changes in small commercial vessel and workboat regulations. We're very pleased to announce the guest speaker is Simon Jinks, who many of you, I'm sure, know. Anyway, he's the Director of Sea Regs. And this presentation is going to be about the small commercial vessels and workboat codes of practice affecting the UK's largest fleet sector, which are changing substantially. It's the biggest shake-up since the codes came out in the early 90s, and has been on the MCA code working committees for the last few years, and hopefully will give us some big insights into some of the changes with regards to manning, safety, management and the implementation of the new codes. So I'll hand you over to Simon. Thank you very much. We don't need that.
No, I don't need one of those.
Got it.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me along. As Gordon said, I'm Simon. I'm from Sea Regs Training, and I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of some of, I suppose, the human element parts of the changes within the new workboat codes and some of the new codes practice that the MCA are looking at bringing out. There are, at the moment, we've got a code which is the Workboat Code Edition 3, and then we've got a new code that hasn't come out at the moment that's still in consultation, which is a code that's called this Sport and Pleasure Code. And that one was supposed to be out about now, but somebody went and called an election in the middle of the year, and that seems to have slowed everything down, unfortunately, so we're waiting. Next slide, please. So a little bit about us. So Sea Regs Training, we've been going about 15 years. We're based over in Turnchapel. And we do theoretical sort of navigation seamanship training. I suppose we specialise in this sort of sector. Our bag, I suppose, is the sub 500 ton sort of sector. We operate classrooms. And then we've got lots of different types of boats as well. We've got ribs, we've got motorboats. Boats, and we've yachts, and we've also got a USV which we use for training, so an unmanned surface vessel, and an ROC, a remote operations centre. And we train about 2,800 people a year. So whilst we're quite small, we're busy, and we keep on going. We're based here, but we do a lot of work all over the place, realistically. So we do a lot of work for ports in and around the country and up in Scotland and different places around the world as well. Next slide, please. And myself, I've been sort of in and within the business for about 40 years. Unfortunately, I added it up the other day, and that's just depressing. So at least I've got a good excuse for having no hair. Again, my experience is sort of sub 500 ton, either running boats, be they sort of tugs, workboats, super yachts, motorboats, operating boats, refitting them, sticking them back together, or teaching in them. And so that's my sort of bag. In and around my career, because I suppose I'm getting up to those the latter part now, I'm sorry to say, but it's been really good to me. I worked for the RYA for a little while, running their yacht master scheme, so running the small boat section, or the training section of that. I ran an auditing, a national auditing part which had 16 surveyors and inspectors working for them for about 5 or 6 years. And I've written a few books along the way to keep me busy. A couple of them by Reeds and then another one by RYA. Next slide, please. We've also got an auditing company or a safety management system company, so we've got that. And in fact, Sea Regs Training is a mistake. When Vicky and I set it up because CREGS is an independent learning provider. It's funded by the Vicky of Simon and Vicky. I'm Simon. Vicky's my wife and the other director. So we don't have any external people with big funds or grants. Everything that we do is graft, and the graft of the instructors who are there. So when we set it up, the reason that it came up as CREGS is we set it up as a safety management system company. It's just that we were a little bit ahead of the game. And CREGS then ended up being quite successful in the training side, so we've had to set up something else to do what we actually intended to do originally, which seems a little bit bizarre anyway. But we do that sort of stuff as well. Next slide, please. Whilst we go and audit and we do that sort of those bits and pieces as CREGS training, we're also audited. So we get audited quite a lot. We've got quite a lot of people feeling our collar to do what we do. Be it the MCA, SQA, all of these different people are looking at us. And so realistically, about once every 6 weeks, we're getting our collar felt in some sort of audit. And then obviously we've got 8 different vessels, and those are being audited and inspected annually as well. So it's never a week goes by when we're not getting our collar felt by some lovely person like Richard here, who's looking at our boats, or the MCA or whoever. So it keeps us on our toes anyway. Next slide, please. That's where we're based. We're based down in Turnchapel Wharf, and it's been a great base for us. We've got the boats there as well, so that's smashing. Next slide, please. And the sort of things that we do is we've got lots of different types of vessels, ribs, motorboats. We do on the water training. We do well on the water-ish, because you're driving that from your bedroom, or a remote operations centre. Next slide, please. And we're always trying to look what the next, where we're going. And based down at Turnchapel, we've been involved in USV and unmanned surface vessel operation and support for about the last 6 or 7 years. So we really feel as though we've been, following it up. So actually buying a USV and then using it for training was a very logical step. Next slide, please. And then obviously we've got the classroom-based stuff, and again we do obviously classroom and the practical elements of that, chucking people in the water with survival courses and putting things out. Next slide, please. We also do some training in and around ports, so cranes, safe access, those bits and pieces. Next slide, please. And for people coming ashore, if they've been at sea and they're then coming ashore, so DP training, so designated person, lead auditor training, and also sort of train the trainer. So, what are people going to do when they do come ashore? Next slide, please. Cool. So that's us getting on with the, with code vessels. It's quite interesting because when we look at the statistics, so many of you may come across these things. These are the statistics that are on the .gov website. Yeah. So if we go into in and around the MCA and we're looking at seafarer statistics, we get these sort of statistics, and these are the statistics for last year, and this gives you an idea of the size of the seafarers. And what have we got there is we've got 10,000 odd certificated officers, we've got 10,000 ratings, we've got 1,500 uncertified officers. And these ones, so what's this made up of? It's made up of your engineers, your masters and your OOWs. Ratings, well, it could be deck, but it could also be catering as well when you look into it. We've got our uncertified officers, so that's anybody who's an officer on board, but they haven't got any official ticket, shall we say, or it could be that they've got a university, a degree in it, but they haven't got a maritime ticket in what they're doing. And then we've got our cadets, so there's about 1,450 officer cadets, which is quite a lot, isn't it, really? That's quite a lot. The sector that I'm involved in, that doesn't cover at all, none of the people who I train, which is quite amazing, isn't it, really? Because I train about 2,500 people a year, and they're not included in those numbers. Next slide, please. And then we've got the UK fleet. So again, when you look on the .gov website and we're looking at what the UK fleet is, this is the statistic that comes up. And so when we go into it, you know, and we go through it, we're looking at about 2,000 vessels. We don't do any of that training either because we're not counted in any of that. Okay, so okay, next slide, please. So where do we come in? This is our bag. This is what we do. So if you think that we've got 2,000 large vessels over 100 GRT or 100 GT, where do we come in? We're looking at the small commercial vessels, small workboats. So small commercial vessels, small boats for sport and pleasure, workboats. And if we look at the fleet size, it's quite large, isn't it? Realistically, yeah, we've got over 5,500. And I suppose if we stop and think, then actually, realistically, when you think one ship comes into a port, and we're right opposite Catdown Wharf, and we see one ship come in, and I was coming in last night on one of our workboats, and there was a line boat going to that ship, there was a pilot boat going to that ship. The ship had come in through a channel, yeah, which the buoys had been laid, so there'd been a multicat out there laying some buoys. So for every one big ship, you've probably got 4 or 5 or 6 other little ones, and each one of those has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people working on it. So our fleet is vast, realistically, when we look at that. Next slide, please. And when we look at the seafarers, the seafarer slide that we looked at before, there was 24,000 UK rated seafarers. The 25,000 commercial skippers who are operating small commercial vessels and workboats are not counted in that 25,000. So when we look at seafarers, actually it's giving a, you know, the area that we're talking about, we're the hidden sector. And it's quite strange, isn't it? Because we're the hidden sector, but in a way, we've got more skippers on the small boats than we have on the larger boats, because you're looking at 10,000 masters, OOWs, engineering officers in the large ship fleets. Okay, so small commercial vessels, 25,000 skippers on the books at the moment. Okay, and that's basically our sector. So it's 25,000 people. And what are they doing? They are servicing 5,500 small commercial vessels or workboats. Okay, and that sort of makes sense. And obviously some of those people, just like some of the UK seafarers, they may not be at sea all the time because they might be doing superintendency roles or whatever, but they're keeping their tickets valid. Okay, and I'm sure that strikes a chord with some of you in the room. We've got tickets. We may not be using them every day. But, you know, we're still holding valid tickets. Okay, next slide, please. So when we actually look, this pie chart is something that I've done through research. When we actually look at the adjusted UK fleet, then it looks something like this. It's a completely different view to the one that we actually see in official government statistics. So that's what we see in the government statistics. And then when we look at the amount of fishing boats that are out there, we get this coming through here, and then small commercial vessels around like that. Next slide, please. And the same is true in the manning and the people when we're looking at UK seafarers. So we're looking at a completely different sort of viewpoint, really. Okay. Why am I telling you about this? Well, one, I think it's sometimes just quite useful to get, you know, to put things into context, because sometimes we think quite a lot about the large vessels, and we don't think so much about the small vessels as support vessels who are going out and doing, you know, some of the donkey work, shall we say, to make sure that the channels are there and the pilots get put on board and the things get dredged. And also, this also takes us on to the sector that we're now going to be looking at. But I just wanted to try and put it into context about, because realistically, how much is this, what we're going to talk about now, going to be affecting the maritime world? Massively. Because we're actually looking at 25,000 people who this is going to affect. If we were in the big ship world, we'd be looking at 10,000 people. Okay, and those 10,000 people, remember, that they're not all of the masters, because that's taking into account the OOWs and the engineers as well. So can you sort of in? It's quite a big sector. Anyway, let's get on. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what is a code vessel? So a code vessel is the way that we would normally look at it, or there are different types of code vessels, but the key ones that we're going to be looking at today are going to be code vessels are vessels that go to sea. Okay, so when we're in Plymouth, when we're going past the breakwater, the big breakwater, that's when we need to have a code vessel, because we're going to sea. This side of the breakwater, we're in inland waters, so therefore we don't actually need to have these sorts of codes applied. We can do other things. Yeah, we can take, most of the MCA's regulations are based on range and risk. So obviously, if we're not going out past a scary breakwater where there be dragons, then we can reduce the amount of safety equipment, the manning, and those sorts of things. So we're looking at vessels that go to sea. They're up to 24 metres, so that's one of the key parameters, and no more than 12 passengers. Okay, and that's how they're. If you fit into that box, if you've got a small vessel under 24 metres, and if you fit into that box, yeah, then that's great. If you're a 30-metre tug, yeah, then you fall outside of that box, and you might need to go into class. Yeah, so you might go into different regulation as you go into that.
Are we talking about load line length?
Sorry?
Are we talking about load line length?
Richard?
Yeah.
Yeah, load line length. Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting how they measure it, because you will notice at some large white yacht companies, not looking in your direction over there, but it's where the overhangs are. Okay, so you can actually have vessels that are, yes, 30. Yeah, I know a good sail training boat that is definitely over, definitely 100 foot that's in our waters, and she fits into 24 metres. Yeah, if you look at it like that, and if you've got one of those tape measures, yeah, all right. And white boats are exactly the same. Okay, all right. So when we're looking up here, very brief history of the codes. Codes of practice started. If we look at the top row, we've got what they called the coloured codes. All right, so we've got the blue, the yellow, the brown, and the red. Okay, and the blue was for sailing vessels. The yellow was for motor vessels. The brown was for work boats. And the red was for vessels that don't go very far. It's called the nominated point of departure code, or the departure point code. And basically they were sort of limiting on that code to about 3 miles, and it was just as though you needed a note from my mum to go that far. You know what I mean? It was really sort of like keeping it low key. And these codes came out in sort of 93, 94. Workboat code 98. It was actually the last of the coloured codes that came out. And there was a code before that, and that was just for sort of sail training vessels. I know we've got some sail trainers here as well, and that's when I got into it in the sort of the late 80s, 89, and that was on the when on the back of things like the sailing vessel, the Marquesa. It was Marquesa, wasn't it? Yeah, that went over, and that came in on the back of the Marquesa. So these were sort of 90s. And then, realistically, when we looked at all of these came out pretty much at the same time, within sort of 4 or 5 years of each other. And they went, well, actually, most of this is exactly the same, because if we took that as a datum code, the motor vessel code, then we could have that as, a generic code, and then we could have a chapter on boats with flappy things, boats with lifty things, yeah, with cranes and that tow, you know, work boats, and, you know, boats that, you know, need a bit of a bungee cord, you know, they don't go very far. So what they did is they put it together into a harmonisation code, okay? So, and they put it in a thing called MGN 280. And let's not go into why is it an MGN and why is it not an MSN. But here, what you can see that there's four bullets on there, and basically what this is saying is it's a harmonisation of all of these codes. And basically it's one of those codes with different chapters in it with the specialisations. And that worked great. That was in about 2004. So that came out, and the back end of the 2000s, about 2008, yeah, a surveyor's note came out, and they said we can now use that for surveying. So Richard would, yeah, we're going to go and use that, and we'll go and do surveys. And so most vessels have been coded on either one of these codes or on these codes. And historically, that's how, if you started in 1993 on a, let's say the blue code or the yellow code or the brown code, every 5 years, the normal MCA sort of cycle, you've got 5 years and a 2.5 mid-term inspection and your annuals to make sure that you're doing your job okay. Every 5 years, you could, if you started on the blue code or the yellow code or whichever code you started on, you could always stay on those codes. Okay, and so we've got boats that are, we've got vessels that are still on the yellow code. We've got vessels that are still on the brown code. We've got boats that are still on the blue code. Or you could have moved them onto the new code, or you could have stayed as you are. If you had a boat and it was in 2010 when everybody was using MGN 280, then you'd have coded it to MGN 280 because that was the most modern standard. So there was always a grandfather rights in codes. Then in about 2015, we had a new workboat code came out, okay? And there was one just before this, it was a technical standard. And realistically, 2015 to 2019, we had this come out, which is the workboat code. And realistically, the workboat industry had gone from a 10 to 15 metre steel single screw chug, chug, chug type thing up to a 24 metres by 24 metres by 8 metres wind farm crew transfer vessel with a bridge that looks like the Starship Enterprise, and cranes and towing and all of this sort of stuff, and shock seats and all of this sort of thing. And it didn't come anywhere close to trying to manage the standard. So the Workboat Association got together, and with the MCA they came up with the new codes, the workboat code. And the new, that came out in 2019, and then we've got a new code which has just come out, which is in 2023, which is Workboat Code Edition 3, which is what we're working to now. So realistically, at the moment, what have we got? We've got any new workboat that's being coded will be coded to Workboat Code 3. If you're already on a code, you'll be on one of those, yeah. If you're part of the workboat, or if you're a workboat on any of these codes, yeah, the brown or Workboat Code 2, or if you're a workboat that was within MGN 280, this new code has stopped all grandfathering. And this is one of the key changes, because now what we're going to be doing is trying to get vessels that were once coded in 1993 through standards that are now on a lot further, yeah. 35, 40 years later, we're now at this, okay? So that's where we're at the moment, okay? And that's where we are with the workboat code. This code is now being rewritten. The workboat code is no longer part of this harmonised code. There's a new code being written for that, and this is a new thing called the Sport and Pleasure Code. Okay, so it's going to take your sailing boats and your motor boats and your boats that don't go very far, And it's basically looking at those and then coming out with a new code, okay, for those. Next slide, please. And so the transitional arrangement for old vessels coming onto the new code is this. And I couldn't fit it all on one slide. I've tried to simplify it a little bit, but so you need to read the whole thing. But it's the key thing is if you're looking at Workboat Code 3, yeah, and when you look at the new Sport and Pleasure Code, the most important chapter, yeah, out of the very big thick book as it now is the one that's named Transitional Arrangements, because that will tell you when you need to comply with the new code, okay, because that will then give you the time frame on which to work back from, okay. They've been pretty good actually, because realistically, yeah, you've got 3 years from the implementation of the workboat code, so December 23, so we're looking at December 26 implementation. It needs to be by that, can be before. Okay. All right. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pick a couple of sections within the code. We're going to look at manning, because there's huge changes in, instead of trying to go through all 33 chapters of the code, we're going to look at some of the ones that's going to affect you, the human, shall we say. So manning. What we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of a comparison between the new workboat code and the old codes, okay, because it's changed massively. Next slide, please. Okay, so the areas, the area categories, they've changed. Now, let me just put a big proviso on this, and that is, at the moment, there's only one code, Workboat Code 3, that's been signed off as an SI, as a statutory instrument that is law, and we know exactly what it is because it's been published. The new Sport and Pleasure Code, whilst I and Richard have been on those committees, yeah, for the last too long, I think was the last thought, wasn't it? Yeah. It's not signed off at the moment, and it's still yet to go out to consultation. And when it does come out for consultation, please consult. Okay, you are needed. If you've got anything to do with small commercial vessels, consult. Okay, because the changes are big, very big. Okay, so areas have changed. So in the key thing here, so what we've got here is we've got different areas for which the vessel would be coded. So we've got Cat 0, which is unrestricted. So this would be any vessel can go, you know, anywhere in the world with that sort of ticket, yeah, with that sort of license, with that sort of certification. And then we've got other ones, 150, 60 miles from a safe haven. And the ones that's changed, none of this has changed realistically, but the 5 and 6 has changed, okay? And that's been quite drastic, okay? So if we, next slide, please. So within the new one, and if you just do next click, lovely. So what I've done is I've put the old code there and the new one there, and I'll just stand back so that you can read it. Okay. So what they've, I suppose one of the bigger changes is the Cat 5, realistically, because the Cat 5 distance has gone down. So we've gone from 20 down to 3, yeah, but we've included a night element to it, which actually makes quite a lot of sense. So for industry, that's good. It completely and utterly changes all the manning for Cat 5, because previously with Cat 5, you may not need to train people or they may not need to have a lot of experience at night. Now, obviously 3 miles from land is actually where you need all the experience, isn't it? Because you're approaching land, you know. Next slide, please. Okay, so the skippers qualifications. What we've got here is we've got the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 0 was unrestricted, you can go anywhere, and we've got the category 6, which is not very far at all. Okay, we've got category 2, category 1, category 3. Most of your coded vessels will be Cat 3, Cat 2. Realistically, that's up to 20 miles day and night. Up to 60 miles day and night. That's where we're tending. You know, that's most of the thing. And remember, that's from a safe haven. So 60 miles from a safe haven will get you over to France. Yeah. So we've got those, and you can see that within these, because they're small commercial vessels, with small commercial vessels, the way that these are certified is the MCA tend not to do these directly. What they do is they give the authority of the surveying and the certification over to certifying authorities. And there's different certifying authorities, and those certifying authorities are specialists in surveying vessels under 24 metres. So within Plymouth we've got MECAL, and then around we've got, you know, YDSA, Yacht Designers and Surveyors Association. Lots and lots of different ones. And then the MCA audit them. So, you know what I mean, to make sure that they're doing it correctly. Because a lot of the qualifications are, or because the vessels are under 24 metres, then, and realistically, when this first came out, it was mainly built as a national way of running vessels nationally, so within our country. So a lot of the qualifications here are RYA, Royal Yachting Association, because who does qualifications for vessels under 24 metres? It's them. So they're pretty good at that. That's what they do. Next slide, please. And next click. So these are probably the key changes for skippers. You can see that within, and can you see that at the back? It must just be okay, I would have thought, or may not be. Okay, I'll leave that up to you. But I'll read it. I'll give you a précis, and that is one of the key differences here is that code vessels, when they were first thought about, and back in the 90s, we were just thinking about for our domestic trade. We were looking for it. You know, it was looking at them operating in and around UK, and occasionally they would go overseas. But a lot has changed over the last 30 or 40 years since the codes have been in existence. And so now many other countries, when you go over to those countries, nothing's really changed within the UK on what ticket you need, what certificate you need. But a lot of stuff has changed when you go overseas. So what they're now looking for is more STCW qualifications. So STCW Master 200, STCW Master 500. You can still use the RYA qualifications and they are still 100% valid. And if you're operating in and within the UK waters, there's no difference between a qualification that's the Master 200 or a Yacht Master Offshore. It allows you to do exactly the same thing. But if you go overseas, remember the Yacht Master, an RYA Yacht Master certificate, it's a national ticket. And a Port State Control may not know RYA, but they will know STCW because that's the ticket that they've got as well. So you can see that if you're going overseas, the STCW master tickets are now becoming more of the requirement. Okay, next slide, please. Additional crew in the old codes. There was no, a safe navigational watch always needed to be kept. Okay, and that's been throughout the codes. Okay, and if the skipper, if the master had, gone off the I'll call it a bridge, but they're usually way too small on a 24 metre vessel to call it a bridge. But if they've gone away from the wheelhouse, then they would expect that the person, who is there keeping a watch would be able to keep a safe navigational watch. However, they were relatively vague on the requirements for the additional crew that was on board. The MCA would say the vessel needs to be safely manned. Okay, the vessel needs to be, the skipper needs to be experienced in the type of vessel and the type of operation. So you might be really good on twin screw, but have you ever towed? Okay, and we know that those two things are completely different. Okay, so it would be making sure that there was induction training, there was continuation training. If you had somebody who had one lot of experience and they're going on a different type of boat, then they would go and be mentored or work as mate whilst they built up that experience. So just like the normal seafaring world. Next slide, please. With the new codes, they've bolstered it. Okay, so the additional crew has bolstered a lot more. So the requirements, the certification has gone up a lot more, and obviously these little clauses in there are really good, because then that's going to really concentrate the mind of the operator to make sure that they've got somebody who's got the ticket but also got the experience and the type and operation of the vessel, and it's got sufficient crew to go and do the job. Because on vessels under 24 metres or on vessels over 24 metres, when the MCA go along and inspect them, they will tend to get a safe manning document. Okay, and it will tell you how many people how many crew need to be on there, how many officers need to be on there. Small commercial vessels, they don't. You can ask for one, but they won't give you one. Okay, and most people won't want to ask for one, because you don't ask a question if you don't want to know the answer, do you, really? So you would, come up with your own safe manning. Okay, and by and large, that people do that quite well. So if you were looking at the tugs in the dockyard, when they're towing, they're going to have 4 or 5 people on there. If you had a similar size Princess motor yacht that was a commercial vessel, it might just have, that was 24 metres, it might just have 1 or 2. Because of the nature of the beast. Okay, so it's going to be dependent on what you're doing. Next slide, please. One of the key changes here, and just one click, thank you, is the extra mandatory courses that skippers and crew are going to need to do. This is one of the biggest fundamental changes that's come about. So we've got firefighting training, never really been in small commercial vessels before. I think brilliant, should have been there forever. Radar training, compulsory radar training, compulsory stability training for any vessel that has a stability information book. Not all small commercial vessels will have a stability information book. It's only those vessels which are, fit a certain criteria. Those that are going long distance, 0 to 1 category, carrying more than 15 persons, over a ton of cargo, towing, lifting devices, those sorts of things. That's when they would get stability. So masters need training in that now. Electronic chart system. So on large vessels over 3,000 tonne, we have compulsory ECDIS training. Okay, or if you've got ECDIS, a fully functioning ECDIS, then we need training on that and within the terminal. We've now got a similar sort of thing, but just on electronic chart systems. Okay, so if you've got electronic chart systems on board, you need training in it. And because of MLC, Maritime Labour Convention, then catering training as well. Okay, so if you've already got a certificate, a certificate with a commercial endorsement, and you're operating on a code vessel at the moment, this is what you will probably need to do, before you go and skipper a boat on Workboat Code 3. Yeah, or under the new Sport and Pleasure Code. And I can't say for certain under the Sport and Pleasure Code. This is what it looks like at the moment-ish. Yeah. But how it ends up after it's been through consultation, I don't know. Okay. Cool. Next slide, please. Engineering, pretty much the same, other than they brought out, and that's the old one. If you do next slide. In the new one, there's a new AEC course. So we've got an approved engine course, which is, it replaced the MCA 30-hour diesel engine course, which some of you may remember. Okay, so now it's a 5-day course. You've got AEC 1, approved engine course 1, which is basically the vessel engineering. Okay, so that's basically the lump itself. And then we've got AEC 2, which is all of the systems, water, hydraulics, electrics, water testing. Yeah, so it's all of those, the ancillary systems that actually as an engineer, it's not just making sure that the engine's going, it's all of the other things that we can steer with and do all of that. Okay, next slide, please. Luckily, apprenticeships have come to assist in some of this. There are now, how many, anybody remember how many cadets there were? 1,400, yeah, so it's 1,400 cadets. And that's 1,400 cadets, and they're obviously doing a cadetship for one of those officer, yeah? Yeah, and how many of those were there? There were 10,000 of those, weren't they? And obviously those are 10,000, and that was a split between engineering, officers, masters, and OOWs. 1,450 cadets who are filling that place. At the moment, how many have we got in the small commercial vessel? How many skippers? 25,000, yeah. Do you know how many apprentices we've got at the moment trying to fulfill those places? 60. I know, because I've got 50 of them. Okay? We, little old Sea Regs in Plymouth, we're the biggest provider of nautical apprenticeships in this field in the country. And we're in Plymouth. It's quite astounding, isn't it? 60, 25,000. And it doesn't cost people anything. And they get all of the qualifications, yeah, everything that they need to go and run a boat or to work on it. Okay? And they get paid whilst they're doing it because it's an apprenticeship, so happy days. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was the manning part, okay? Manning part took a little bit of time. We'll just have a quick look at safety management. Okay, next slide, please. All of these codes, okay, all of these codes here, including MGN 280, not one of those had the words safety management system. They had safety, might have management in there, but yeah, and they'd have chapters on systems, but they wouldn't actually put them together as what we would think of as a way of managing all of the stuff in those codes and all of the people that's wanted in those codes. There was no system in there, you know, holistic system in there to actually manage it. Okay, so there's no requirement for safety management in there. Okay, next slide, please. What there was in there is we would be operating under either Health and Safety at Work Act if the vessel was ashore, yeah, or if the vessel was alongside and being worked on, yeah, Princess, yeah, or if the master was involved, yeah, as soon as the master went down, then we'd have the merchant shipping health and safety regulations, yeah, 1997, and it would be operated under those, okay, and that's always been there. You know, especially since 1997 when those came out. So that's basically how those codes have been operated. Next slide, please. But what's happened over the last few years? Well, this was Sea Dogs. This was an incident, an MIAB incident. Sea Dogs, which was a rib in Southampton water. And this is where a young girl, 15-year-old, tragically lost her life, and 2 other people had life-changing injuries. And they were out, they were doing rib rides, so this is a rib riding company, and they went out and they hit Greenland Buoy just there, and they hit it at 39.9 knots. 39.9 knots. Now, I don't think that those people would know the difference between 39.9 knots and 30 knots, and they probably wouldn't know the difference between that and 27 knots. But the amount of situational awareness that that person needs when you're driving that boat, when you're doing that, is quite a lot, isn't it, really? So in here, and you may not be able to see, but in here it says there was no formal requirement for safety management. So you can see that the word safety management has started coming out. And if you just do next slide, and that was operating under MGN 280. Next slide. Next slide, please. We had this little boat, the Bella. And I suppose the Bella did a little bit of a herald of free enterprise, I suppose. Not as disastrously as that. But basically, water came over, okay. The coaming here wasn't enough to stop the water coming down, and it got about as far as the herald of free enterprise as well, which was a couple of cables off. Didn't actually get too far before it foundered as well. Again, you can see not an effective safety management. So there's a trend, isn't there? Next slide, please. And then we had this one, which I went up and did some work on the end of this one. And this was up in Scotland. This was a fish farm. This was a safe access issue, and a fish farm manager was getting off one vessel, stepping onto the cages of a fish farm, and that's the cages of the fish farm. Huge, great big thing. Anyway, slipped down the side, and unfortunately died. And again, MIIB recommendations: implement a safety management system across its fleet that complies with the principles of ISM, International Safety Management. So you can see there's a trend. Next slide, please. In Workboat Code 2, so in 2019, Workboat Code 2 came out, and it came out with a section saying safety management system. Hallelujah. Because I've been talking about safety management systems for code vessels for many, many years, since MGN 280 came out. And it actually had in there a chapter that said safety management systems are recommended for operators. It's a good start. Lots of people have died since then. Next slide, please. The new code, okay, Workboat Code Edition 3, came out in December 2023. Okay, you can see the word shall has now come in. So it's now no longer a recommendation. It's a requirement for all vessels under the Workboat Code to have a safety management system. The same chapter, the same headings are in the new Sport and Pleasure Code. Now, I can't say that will be a mandatory. I'm pretty sure it will be, because that's where a lot of the problems have been. Yeah, they're not going to take that one out. Yeah, that's one that I would put money on. Okay, next slide, please. So we don't know about that at the moment, but I could put a pretty high confidence level on that. Okay, next slide, please. And what are they looking for? And the reason I put question marks up there is just because we don't know at the moment. What are they looking for? Is they're looking for a safety management system that's going to roughly comply with a thing called with ISM, International Safety Management. And the ISM code is the one that came out of the herald of free enterprise. Okay, so herald of free enterprise came out, turned over. Big inquiry by Lord Justice Sheen, or Mr. Justice Sheen as it was at the time, and two things came out of that: requirement for safety management, and why? Because I think, in his words, there was a shocking lack of responsibility by the owners and managers. So I think those are the words that came out in his report. And the other thing that came out of the Herald of Free Enterprise was the formation of the MAIB, Marine Accident Investigation Branch. So those, that's quite a big instigator. So we're looking at a safety management system. It should form, roughly along the principles of ISM. Next slide. And what is that? If you just do the next three. Okay, I won't read that, but that will give you a pretty good idea of what's in there. Okay. Realistically, we've got these bits which are the responsibilities. Okay. When we're looking at the objectives of this is realistically there's 5. Okay, and that is, the primary objectives, and we're not looking at the functional requirements, but the objectives here is risk assess, safe working practices and procedures, continuous improvement. So if there is a problem, we find out why it happened and we try and make it better next time. Compliance with all mandatory rules and regulations, and to take into account best practice. Yeah, and those are the objectives of it. And what's it realistically looking at? It's looking at safety of life at sea, isn't it? Yeah. And this is going to be quite interesting because if you've gone and done any, if you've gone through the large vessel world, ISM is imprinted in you before you get anywhere near a vessel because we know that it's a thing. But small commercial vessel people have never come across this. They've never had the history of safety management systems. They don't know it's a thing. Master's responsibility and authority. Most of them have never been trained in that. If you do a cadetship, if you're going on and you're being a master and you're going for your orals and all of that sort of stuff, then you will be examined on master's responsibility, master's authority. It's not an examinable thing at the moment within the skipper's qualification. So these things are going to be completely new to them. What is their responsibility if you're operating a small commercial vessel? Okay, so there's lots in here that a lot of people don't know because they haven't been taught. And it's not because of ignorance, it's because they haven't been taught. Okay. Now, ignorance, I didn't know that a van goes at you can only drive it at a slower speed than a car. How did I find that out?
Got a speeding ticket?
I did, yeah. I managed to get 2. One on the way to London and one on the way back. So if you're going to do a job, do it well. Now, when I got that speeding ticket, did I go, well, I didn't know, so therefore you can't prosecute me. So ignorance is no defence, is it? But there's 25,000 people who don't know a lot of the responsibilities that are now going to be applied onto them. So it's going to be a big hole coming up. So that's basically what's in it. Next slide, please. The other part is, which is coming into all safety management systems. It came into ISM, okay, in 2019, and it's also going to be a big part of the new workboat code and sport and pleasure code, which is cyber. So we're not only looking for normal risk assessments and cyber, but we're also now looking at cyber risks. Okay, and there's going to be some very difficult. Some things within the requirements in there are pretty hard to achieve at the moment. Be able to get the vessel back in the event of a cyber attack. Well, unless you've got paddles, that might be the only way, or sails. Yeah. But unless they're electrically operated, because most things these days are going through some sort of CPU on a vessel, engine management systems, steering systems, navigational systems. So if you wanted to get into it, there's a possibility that you could completely knock out the whole boat. Just think about me and my USV. Everything is on there. Okay, but I've got to have a cyber risk assessment for operating my USV. Next slide, please. So there's going to be an element of people not knowing, especially in this sector. Okay, within the workboat code, within the new sport and pleasure code, people are not going to know what they need to know. The operators may not know because they haven't come across it before. The masters may not know. There will need to be a DP, a designated person. It's a requirement. There isn't a requirement for an auditor, but with that continuous improvement, in a way, there's going to be some sort of audit that's done. And just for the general company, because we're not just looking at the vessel, we're looking at the whole company, how the company works. And also for the CAs, the surveyors, because the surveyors realistically are not trained in auditing. They're trained in surveying, realistically, but they're not trained in auditing. Some are, but realistically they're looking at the structure of the boat, the construction of the boat, how it's fared, the safety equipment that's on the boat. You know what I mean? They're massively experienced in all of that. But actually, are they able to look at one of these? Because at the moment, with ISM, with a big ship, who comes along to have a look at you? It's the MCA, isn't it? The MCA come along and feel your collar, you know, annually or every couple of years, depending on whether you're on the boat or ashore. But with this, it's going to be the certifying authority. Okay, and at the moment, we don't know how the certifying authority is going to examine compliance with the mandatory safety management system. And at the moment I'm doing some work with some of the certifying authorities in, you know, possibly training surveyors and looking at what happens going forward. But we can't really, we've got to a stage of going, yeah, but the MCA haven't really made the mind up on how it's going to happen at the moment. So we can't do anything. Okay, all right, cool. Next slide, please. And that's me. I'm sorry if I overran a little bit, but I hope that gives you a bit of an overview in the manning and the safety management elements within the new codes. Realistically, the old codes were, you know, about like that and about that thick. The new codes are bigger and about 3 times as thick. So it's all going to get more, bigger, more expensive. And there's a lot of people who are going to have to do quite a lot of learning because of the human element. Thank you.